To get started, some practical things first. So we actually only have 6 more lectures, including today, and a review session. So today I'm going to continue finishing up what I talked about last time, and then a little bit on prohibition and religion. On Wednesday, I'm going to talk about modern culture, looking first half of the class at Hollywood, second half of the class at music. The next Monday is a holiday, don't forget. So next Wednesday, we'll go into the Great Depression. On the 19th, which is the Monday before Thanksgiving, we're doing the New Deal. Now, I've canceled the class on Wednesday before Thanksgiving because my experience has been a class at 4 p.m. on Wednesday before Thanksgiving gets maybe 3 people who show up. So that's just the luck of the draw. But then the following week, we'll do, the 26th and 28th, we will do the movement towards war and the American century, World War II, and wrap up the class. And on December 3rd, we'll do a review session. I'm going to be sending out a poll via BSpace asking you to tell me whether in the past, I've often had, for the final in this class, take-home only. Often because the finals were scheduled sort of at the last day before Christmas break or something like that. This time, because we're on Monday, Wednesday, it's not quite so horrid. But so we could have a final that's a take-home final that would involve two essays. One based on readings that you select through the readings that you want to answer a question about, and the other would be based a question from questions that are based on some of the themes we've been exploring in the class. So lectures primarily, but also you could deal with some of the readings as well. If we don't do that, then the alternative would be one take-home essay and then short answers and IDs in the actual class. Yeah.
Would they still be both 5-page essays?
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds easy, doesn't it? Well, don't say that. Just to make sure everybody thinks it's very, very hard. Anyway, I will be posting a poll, and I would like your input on that. What you would prefer. And basically, it'll be majority decision. So last time we were talking about sex life, which was always kind of an interesting topic. And some of this is, this is not easy information to get a hold of. So to find out how many children were born, firstborn children were born less than 9 months after the marriage, requires sifting through a lot of data and inputting it and coming up with an algorithm. But it seems pretty reliable data. The reports on premarital sexual activity can't be figured out that way because there's no data except what people say about their sex lives, and I think we all know from experience with friends that that's very unreliable information indeed. But we have, actually large numbers of interviews and surveys dealing with this, so there's probably some validity to it. One of the things that we can say with absolute certainty, because all the data is there, is that the age of first marriage declined significantly through the first half of the 20th century. And it was a decline that was continuing from the end of from the second quarter, the final quarter of the 19th century. So in 1875, for age of first marriage was like 28, 20, and 26 for men and women. By 1900, it had become 25 and 24. And in 1950, it was 19 and 17. So that was one of the reasons why I could say to you, if this was 60 years ago, you'd look around the room and half of you would already be parents. And thus, obviously, the way you look at life would be very, very different than it is now. Bachelorhood became a much shorter phase of life, and this was regardless of education or class. Now, I said, in this room, half of you would already be parents, but actually I have to modify that, because for the age of marriage, particularly for women, is very much connected to education. So in 1930, fewer than 1% of young women aged 16 to 19 who were still in school were married. But over half of the women who had left school in that same age group had already married. So marriage generally happened for women very shortly after they completed their education, whenever that was. The median figure is 3 months after you've completed your education. If you're a woman, you're married. So for middle-class women, college education was by the 20th century was already obligatory, pretty much. So you would get married in the year following getting your BA. So you probably would be 21. For urban working class women, it was typical for working class women in the cities to go to high school for all sorts of reasons. So you would be married the year following your graduation from high school. If for rural women, you typically did not go to high school, so you would be married 15 or 16, at the age of 15 or 16. Like in the video, the first woman from Marshall, Texas, was married at the age of 15. And this was the way things seemed to be happening. For men, the relationship of education, work, and marriage was more varied. But in general, for both men and women, the process of leaving school, entering the workforce, and getting married typically occurred relatively all at the same time. So if a woman in the median was married 3 months after she finished her education, for a man, it was 14 months. Presumably, the difference is oftentimes the males were a little older, remained a little older than their spouses, usually a year or two ahead. And secondly, the male still had an obligation to demonstrate that he could find and hold down a job of some sort. Otherwise, you'd be a very poor prospect for a husband. But then there's the 40% of the cases where the woman is pregnant, and you have a serious problem that has to be addressed because for a woman, in particular, being a single mother is the surest path to deep poverty. The gender was very much the most predictive factor in whether you were very poor as opposed to race even. Okay. By 1930, in any event, also the other factor is the percentage of people married at any one time increased dramatically. So in the 19th century, after the Civil War, it was typically 3 out of 4 adults at any given time would be married. By 1930, 85% of adults are married at any one time. By 1950, it's over 90%. Now, there are some brief drops in marriage rates at the beginning of the 1930s depression, but by the mid-30s, marriage rates have already returned to it's like a dip, and then the curve is continuing as if nothing had happened in between. There's also another dip at the beginning of the U.S. entry into World War II. But then, once again, even well before the war ends, marriage rates jump back to normal, meaning that they're continuing to climb on a regular basis. Now, all of this is an indication of how strong the expectation was that a normal life involved early marriage. Now, this was not because people were telling people, young people, young adults to get married. On the contrary, the churches were saying, wait, wait, wait. Parents were saying, wait, wait, wait. The advice literature was saying, wait till you're a little bit more mature. Young people were getting married at a younger age, despite all the advice that was given to them. So there was apparently some sort of cultural imperative going on or personal imperative, that contravened all the received wisdom in the culture. Now, some of this could very well have to be with how do you get some kind of autonomy and respect. Marriage was the fastest way to become a grown-up. But also it is evidence that of the relative prosperity of the U.S. society throughout this period. And the idea that, you could afford to do these things. And I should add that all these figures and trends are true for all races without exception, except for some of the Asian immigrant groups where female immigration had been highly restricted. And there, if you factor that reality, that grim reality into things, those groups, the Filipinos and the Chinese community, are marrying at pretty much the same rates. And once you factor in education level, there's actually no significant divergence between when members of different races get married. So the conflation of finishing school, finding work, and getting married, and also becoming a parent, contributed to each serving as central markers for personal independence and autonomy, of being ready to take your place in society. Bachelor men who delayed getting married were viewed in popular media increasingly as immature men who refused to grow up. An image that affected public presentations of both the playboy and the homosexual.